Warning, I chain smoke and I say fuck a lot. But I accept myself for the way I am. I accept you too. Viewer discretion advised.
I published a video May 16th of this year, 2018, called Goddard and PRIX. By July 3rd, 2018, a little over a month and a half later, it got a copyright strike and a copyright takedown issued from the order of SNAIL, SNAIL, and Random Records. Ironically, SNAIL is the DJ that collaborated with Brian Claflin, aka PRIX. The original is still up on BitChute. I'll be sure to leave a link. It was copyright struck because of the song that I used in it, which was Brian Claflin's song, Don't Get So Upset. And usually when you use a copywritten song, whoever owns the rights to it just claims the ad revenue. And since my channel's not monetized, that never matters to me. But he went above beyond to have it taken down, and that always sat a little weird with me. So here's the info again, without the song in the background. From the LA Times, May 11th, 2018. A notorious mansion, an alleged assault by a Hollywood producer, a suicide. What happened to Brian Claflin? Brian Claflin was a young artist from Utah who alleged he was sexually assaulted by Hollywood producer Gary Goddard. In the early afternoon of June 5th, 2014, a man appeared on the subway tracks between stations in Berlin. He stood alone a few hundred yards into the tunnel, and train conductors said they couldn't brake in time to avoid hitting him. The fatal accident received no media attention, except for a local brief that noted the early rush hour train delays. The identity of the deceased? Brian Claflin. A 33-year-old American was not reported, nor was his connection to powerful men in Hollywood who were accused of sexual abuse. German authorities declared the death to be presumed suicide. 4 years later, Claflin's parents are still trying to understand what happened to their son. Claflin's father received via email a statement his son sent to a law firm just before his death, alleging that filmmaker Gary Goddard had drugged and sexually assaulted him at age 18 in Los Angeles. It was an allegation Claflin had made repeatedly in the preceding decade. The Times spoke to 3 people, 2 close friends and his sister Molly Jones, who said Claflin told them about the alleged assault, and he accused Goddard directly in an email exchange in 2006. Goddard vociferously denied the allegation then, as he does now. Goddard, a director, producer, and theme park designer, has faced similar allegations. Last December, 8 former members of Santa Barbara Youth Theater Group in the 1970s alleged that Goddard molested or attempted to molest them. A 9th was said to have told others before he died that Goddard sexually assaulted him as a child. Goddard denied these allegations. Claflin's chance to exit Utah came when he met a man from Santa Monica at a gay nightclub before his senior year. In a letter to a lawyer, Claflin wrote that the stranger told him he was the most beautiful boy he'd ever met, and that he knew some very rich and powerful people that wanted to meet me and could possibly get me a job. On his 18th birthday, he said the man flew him to LA, where he was taken to an Encino mansion and introduced to what I was told were the most powerful people in Hollywood. The mansion would become notorious as a site for sexual exploitation of underage boys. It was home to the 3 co-founders of digital entertainment network, Den, an early internet content streaming experiment with investment from wealthy Hollywood figures including Goddard. Den co-founder Mark Collins-Rector pleaded guilty in 2004 to engaging in sexual activity with underage boys. He lured to California with a promise of jobs and an extravagant lifestyle, boasting he belonged to a powerful group of people who could influence their participation in the entertainment industry. By then, Collins-Rector and the other 2 Den co-founders had been embroiled in litigation alleging sex abuse. Collins-Rector settled a suit brought by a New Jersey boy, and the 3 co-founders were sued by 3 boys who had been employed by Den. The co-founders left the country, but were found liable for a multi-million-dollar default judgment. In his statement, Claflin said that in 1999, he was also brought to the Beverly Hills home of Goddard, who had directed one of his favorite childhood movies, Masters of the Universe. Claflin, still 18, said he started living at Goddard's home and fended off Goddard's unwanted sexual advances on a nightly basis, to the point where I had to lock the door or put something heavy in front of it so that I would hear it if he tried to get in. In his statement, Claflin said Goddard and a friend of the filmmaker persuaded him to inhale nitrous oxide one night. which was the first time he had used drugs. He immediately felt dizzy and passed out, he wrote, and awoke to being further drugged while Goddard sexually assaulted him. I was in a delirious state and remember saying, no, 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 several times, but they persisted, he wrote. I just sort of shut down and went somewhere else in my head. After a while, I remember praying aloud to God to just make it stop. Over the next 15 years, Claflin lived in several countries before settling permanently in Berlin in 2008. He became a heavy drug user and drinker and contracted HIV. He was sort of lost, said his friend Travis Jeppesen, a Berlin-based author. Jeppesen said that Claflin told him that Goddard had sexually abused him. Another longtime friend also said that Claflin made the allegations to him, as did his younger sister, Jones. Quote, you can't separate his trajectory from what Gary did to him, Jones said. Emails obtained by the Times show that Claflin confronted Goddard about alleged assault directly and in detail in 2006 and referred to his aggressive sexual behavior toward younger boys. Singer dismissed such claims as hearsay and said that Claflin's communications were erratic and often full of untruths and often sent with the motive to try to get Gary to send him money. By his 30s, Claflin had long established a truce with his Mormon parents back home. His father was confined to the house all day with MS, bringing him and his son close via long Skype conversations. In May 2014, Claflin told his father about litigation that had made international news. A Florida-based attorney, Jeff Herman, had filed lawsuits against Goddard and X-Men director Bryan Singer, both former den investors, accusing them of sexually abusing boys in connections with that company, and at a London hotel room in 2006. Singer and Goddard denied the allegations.
We allege that back in 2003, Gary Goddard went online and contacted my client, who was then 14 years old. And through that contact, he established a friendship, told my client he had the right kind of look for show business. He told my client, Gary Goddard, told my client that he knew people in show business that could help him, including Bryan Singer. When my client turned 15, he asked my client to send him more explicit photos. Ultimately, this young boy sent him nude photographs. Then they did a online chatting, and we allege in a complaint that Gary Goddard and my client engaged in nude chatting. My client was nude while Gary Goddard masturbated. When my client turned 16, Gary Goddard traveled to Great Britain, had my client come down to London to meet him there, where they engaged in sexual activity, specifically anal intercourse. My client receives a communication inviting him to come down to a special event, and they invite him to come down, which turns out to be the Superman premiere in London. 17 years old, he arrives at this premiere event. He's told he's going to be riding with Bryan Singer. Bryan takes him and brings him onto the red carpet. Bryan Singer takes him into an after party where he offers him a Quaalude, which my client at 17 does not accept, and then they give him a drink. He drinks it, says he feels very intoxicated. He gets invited back to an after party, or the after party in Bryan Singer's suite. And under the pretense of showing him some Superman memorabilia, Bryan Singer and Gary Goddard take the 17-year-old boy into the bedroom. They begin to try to do sexual things to him. He resists. He says no. He's uncomfortable. Gary Goddard leaves the room and comes back with a big muscle-bound man. And he physically manhandles my client. He pushes him around. He holds him while Bryan Singer starts to take off his clothes. After a little while, they tell this man, the big man, to leave. And my client says, I want to leave. I'm uncomfortable. And then he's told, well, Bryan says to him, if you just get on top of me and do some sort of masturbatory thing, then you can leave. My client complies, which he does while Gary Goddard's in the room. We allege that he is laying on top of, my client at 17 is laying on top of Bryan Singer naked and performs this type of sexual activity.
After a widely covered April 2014 news conference in which Herman vowed to, quote, expose every Hollywood pedophile and predator he could identify, Claflin was determined to help. He was motivated by a sense of justice and righteousness and sought closure, Jeppesen said. His father connected him to the Florida firm, and Claflin spoke repeatedly with Herman. He also sent the statement alleging Goddard's sexual assault, ending it by saying he was, quote, exhausted, but would resume contact the next day. The stress of involving himself in Herman's efforts, combined with an apparent withdrawal from drug use, seemed to push Claflin into deep paranoia, Jeppesen said. He was trying to do the right thing, but was fearful of the consequences. He told friends about powerful men in Hollywood who wanted him dead, because he knew too much. A week or so before his death, his parents Skyped with him as he barricaded himself in his bathroom, afraid of men he said were stalking him from the roof. On June 2nd, 2014, Claflin texted his father to, quote, have a handgun nearby. 3 days later, Claflin was hit by a train as he stood in a tunnel of the Berlin subway. 2 train operators said that they saw nobody else with him. German authorities concluded Claflin's cause of death was massive head trauma resulting from presumed suicide by train impact. His mom and siblings went to Germany and returned with a handful of ashes, few answers as to what had happened to Claflin, and a growing fear, rooted in little evidence except for the timing of his death, that his paranoia had been justified. Herman discussed Brian Claflin under oath. He said that Claflin was one of many people he had heard from around the world who said that they were abused by people in Hollywood. He described Claflin as a witness with important information. Having been an errand boy for the Den Mansion in Encino, Claflin was fearful that somebody was going to try to kill him because he knew too much about a, quote, gay mafia in Hollywood, Herman said. Brian Claflin's parents said that they decided to take their son's allegations public in support of several new accusers, including ER star Anthony Edwards, who alleged that Goddard molested them 4 decades ago.
Actor Anthony Edwards is now speaking out about alleged sexual abuse he says began when he was a young teenager.
And it involves a big-name Hollywood producer.
Yeah, Pat and Rick, the former ER actor is accusing director, writer, and producer Gary Goddard of molesting him more than 4 decades ago.
You really do.
Whether as Goose in Top Gun.
No. There's 2 O's in Goose.
Or Dr. Green on the hit TV show ER.
You just became my very last patient.
Anthony Edwards brings honesty to the roles he plays. But in a new heartfelt essay posted on Medium titled, Yes, Mom, There Is Something Wrong, the actor talks about being just 14 years old when his mother, quote, opened the door for me to answer honestly about the rumors she had heard about Gary Goddard, who was my mentor, teacher, and friend, being a pedophile. Edwards says he was not honest back then and denied the rumors due to complete panic. Goddard, now 63, is a film director, writer, and producer behind such movies as Masters of the Universe. Edwards says he was just 12 when he met Goddard, who was almost a decade older. Quote, one of the most tragic effects of sexual abuse in children is that the victims often feel deeply responsible, as if it is somehow their fault.
Also in fear. What was that like? What did you think you were going to do next?
I was ashamed that I didn't stop the molestation. I mean, I loved Tony. He's my friend since we were 13. But I didn't know what to do. So, sorry. I was angry too, but I just laid there.
Edwards writes he came face to face with Goddard 22 years ago at an airport and confronted him. Edwards claims Goddard was remorseful and said he'd gotten help. Goddard is denying all of Edwards' claims.
And from Brian Claflin's Legacy guest book, June 23rd, 2014. I first met Brian when he moved to LA, and he stood out immediately. He was a bright spirit, confident, creative, smart, witty, and most importantly, had a great heart. People liked him from the start. He had compassion for others, and he had an artist's soul. As he grew older, his fascination with the world and his wanderlust launched him out into the wide world. During his many travels, from time to time I would get calls in the middle of the night from Brian, stuck in Hong Kong, or somewhere in Istanbul, or elsewhere, pleading for me to get him an air ticket home, which I did. As he continued his journey, I would get a postcard or an email or a phone call every once in a while, always from some new location around the world, always some exotic story of adventure or mystery or intrigue. And then came Berlin. He found himself in the midst of fellow artists and creatives and rebels. It was there he had found kindred spirits. While he had his share of ups and downs there, I think mostly he found a sense of wonder and inspiration. He was a citizen of the world, and he evolved as an artist and human being through the good and bad times of his Berlin home. Most recently, he called me about 6 months ago to let me know he had been accepted into a prestige French photography academy and that he was excited about his future. He told me that he felt photography had become his true source of expression and asked if I could help with tuition, which I gladly did. I last spoke to him about 3 months ago as he was about to start his second term at the academy, and he seemed the happiest he had ever been. He said, "I feel that I have found myself, really found myself, and I'm on the right track." From his voice and speaking to him, I felt he was the happiest and healthiest I had heard him in years. He was in a very good place, and I honestly felt he was turning a major corner in his life. He was genuinely happy. I had hoped to see some of his photography work, and he promised to create something for me. I was looking forward to seeing his new work in the near future. So I was stunned and heartbroken when I learned that he had passed away, far too young to depart the earth. I will miss his presence greatly, yet he lived life to the fullest and burned brightly while here. It was my great pleasure to have known him. My condolences to his family. Know that you raised a wonderful human being who brought a caring and independent spirit to the world, and who will always remain in my thoughts. Gary, Beverly Hills. And one last thing, and I know this one is just a coincidence. What do you think the odds are that Snacks, who had my video taken down, played recently at Comet Ping Pong? February 21st, 2018, Snacks at Comet Ping Pong. Getting into my gig last Friday at Comet Ping Pong. Well, ain't that a coinky dink? Fucking stoned. I got